right. Good afternoon, everybody. Scott Sternberg here at the Sternberg, Naccari and White Law Firm headquarters in New Orleans with my friend Mike Finkelstein. We're thrilled to have him here joining us for a Wednesday web chat in real life.
Yeah,
the real deal.
It's good to be back in the office.
Yeah, isn't it? It is kind of nice to see people again.
Yeah, just get back in the normal routine and normal swing of things.
For sure. So Mike and I are here to do our Wednesday web chat this week about the things that we are seeing in our litigation practice. Mike and I practice very closely together. There aren't many cases that you work on without me and that I work on without you. We're litigation partners in the truest sense of the word. And so we're having a lot of fun getting back into the groove of litigation. And one of the things that we wanted to talk about on this Wednesday web chat is the litigation climate as COVID continues and as world, because a lot's changed and we've seen a lot of things that are really going to change litigation forever, right, Mike?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and get into our agenda. You know, we're going to give you a broad and sweeping look at litigation during and post-COVID. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them on Facebook or send them our way. You can check us out at SNW.LAW. We're happy to talk to you about your claims, you know, assuming that you're not already represented by another lawyer, in which case we'll have to tell you to talk to that person. But so the first thing we're going to talk about is the suspension of prescription. What have we got going on about the suspension of prescription, Mike?
Yeah, sure. So starting out, looking at suspension, and it's not only just prescription, but we're also talking about preemption, and we're talking about abandonment periods. So these periods were initially interrupted by Governor Bell Edwards' executive orders, and what we've seen since then is an adoption by the legislature. That was House Bill 805, and that was signed by Governor Bell Edwards on June 19th. And what that provides is an active suspension of prescriptive, preemptive, and abandonment periods. And that takes place from March up through July 5th is when that period runs. So what this means is if you haven't filed an action, a lawsuit, for something that would have arisen, it has to be during that time. That's a really important thing. It has to be during that time. It's then suspended until the end of that period. So it ends on July 5th. I think just to be safe, you could get it filed during that time. But that's both for prescriptive actions that would be subject to prescriptive periods or preemptive periods. So abandonment is also within that same category. So if your action has been sitting in court and it would have abandoned during that time, then that abandonment is also suspended. So really important thing, though, to allow litigants whose actions would have run, maybe they were involved in something like a vehicle accident, very simple 1-year prescriptive period there against the adverse driver. So that period, if it would have run during that time, that's suspended till that July 5th date. And, it's really something that's positive. Maybe you or I could have filed a lawsuit during that time, but this helps protect the general public of Louisiana. Perhaps there's someone who, was feeling averse to going into a court even once they reopened. Obviously, the courts were closed for some time, but maybe even once they reopened, they either didn't have the means to get there or didn't feel safe because of some kind of condition that would have made them feel more susceptible to COVID. And so this allows for people who are in those kinds of situations to be able to have their litigious rights preserved during that time. So
it's really a different story, though, for the trial courts versus the appeals courts, right? Because you and I have a lot of appeals going on, and it seems like the appeals courts kept kind of churning while COVID was going on.
Yeah, so not every court was in the same exact situation. So for instance, the United States Fifth Circuit, which sits here above us in Louisiana, that court didn't have a standing order, but what we did see is we were able to still file writs. We had several that we filed during that time.
Right.
But we did see, for instance, the Supreme Court had an order that originally, had gone for a month and then was extended a couple times as the crisis kind of unfolded here with the COVID pandemic. But then also with Tropical Storm Cristobal, another extension tacked on of 1 more week. So, so what the Supreme Court did was it had extended its orders. They eventually ran on June 15th. And so what the court said there was that the time period for filing with the Supreme Court is extended while we have these orders in place. And then it did allow for people who are able to show extenuating circumstances to file after that time if they're able to show it. And there's some specific showings that the Supreme Court would require, but at the end of the day, the order was that it would run through June 15th, but that after that time, not all hope is lost. If you had extenuating circumstances, you can still apply to the Supreme Court, show good cause, and ask for the court to allow you to file your Supreme Court application. So not all hope is lost if you have not filed.
Great. And you might be wondering, well, I need to talk to my lawyer about this. And that is exactly what you should do. Don't call us about your other lawyers' work. Not that we're not interested in helping you, but we can't really talk to you about your cases. But we know that we have a lot of clients who have multiple lawyers. And so, that's why we wanted to talk today about, what's going on with these claims, not your claim in particular, but lawsuits in particular. Because, for example, we had one of the first oral arguments for an appellate court in Louisiana by Zoom, and it's just not the same feeling. And so we wanted to talk about kind of how the practice of law has changed. Are you doing a lot of depositions, Mike?
Yeah, we're doing a lot of depositions during this time. For us, it's important to keep moving our clients' cases forward, whether that's a plaintiff case we have or a defense case we have. So we're trying to get those things and just keep them moving. It's something that's really good to do during this time while courts are closed. Mm-hmm. You can still keep those files active. We've done some by Zoom during closure periods, and now we're starting to see people being willing to do them in person again. Mm-hmm. And so we're kind of have a mixed bag. For instance, there's a case I had a deposition in earlier this week, and some people had attended in person and others had attended by Zoom. So you're seeing a little bit of a mixed bag depending on what people are comfortable with. It's not only on the deponent, but also the lawyers who are involved here. So, I would encourage anyone who's looking to engage in depositions to think about the kind of case that you have. And obviously you're going to want to coordinate with the other attorneys who are involved and the witnesses, because, you don't want to put anyone in a position where they're uncomfortable to engage in a deposition or just be in the same room as someone.
Right. And so we expect Zoom depositions to continue for quite some time.
We do.
Yeah.
And, really, as long as you're able to maintain a high level of coordination, and there are some particular pitfalls with Zoom depositions, in terms of thinking about what kind of case you have, I would, suggest to you that you should think about, is this a document intensive deposition, maybe a corporate deposition where you're reviewing financial records, let's say. That's going to be much more difficult to do by Zoom than it would be, say, for a fact witness on a personal injury case, where you're not going to be exchanging documents. You're not going to be showing them a whole lot of things. Maybe there will be a few, pictures or something like that. But really, it can get very complicated when you're talking about having witnesses view exhibits, when you're talking about, pointing to the same lines. And obviously, you're always going to want to keep your transcript clear and reference, but it really brings up that there's a need for a very high level of coordination mm-hmm. to make sure that all the documents are Bates numbered, so that you can, make sure that the transcript's clear, so that you can attach things as exhibits later. And so, sometimes if the witness already has the exhibits versus if the witness doesn't have them, that's another kind of level of coordination and just figuring out, where are you with relation to the witness? Where's the court reporter? And I would recommend anyone who does a Zoom deposition to, review that transcript. Don't waive the read and sign period, and make sure that it's all accurate, because sometimes it can just happen.
And is it harder to take a deposition by Zoom?
It's definitely harder to take a deposition by Zoom. There's just the simple cues that you can't fully get when you're in, as you could when you're in person, of someone who's about to talk, or just other kind of cues that you can't get if you feel like you're attempting to judge someone's truthworthiness, let's say, on a deposition. Well, maybe you're not kind of seeing their fidgetiness,
right.
And then just the kind of very simple cues that you would get in conversation with someone, you're not getting by Zoom. So definitely think about the importance of that deponent also to your case, as you think about whether you should want to take their deposition by Zoom, because, unless you're really on maybe let's say a federal court scheduling order where you've really got to get depositions done.
Right.
If it's something that you feel like you should put off because it would be better for your case, I'd still recommend maybe waiting until people are comfortable to do that deposition later on.
Depositions are just one part of litigation, though. And I mean, we're talking about hearings. We had 2 hearings yesterday, and I did them by video conference, and it's actually interesting. It's more convenient to have a hearing by video conference than it is in person. Isn't that amazing? And I think that, can you explain to our audience why, it's easier on the lawyers and cheaper for the clients to have these hearings by Zoom?
Sure. Yeah, there's a ton of benefits for clients and for lawyers to do simple, short hearings by Zoom. This is actually something I've been pushing for years. Back in 2017, when Scott and I first started working together, we flew to Houston twice for a conference. We weren't in the courtroom for more than maybe 10 minutes the first time and 20 minutes the second time. So doing hearings and status conferences by Zoom is something that's going to be much more efficient for parties, because you're not sitting there, for instance, in state court or in federal court. Maybe you have a hearing with a magistrate on a discovery motion. You're not sitting there taking up time while you wait for your case to be called. Now, there's some benefits to that, to seeing other attorneys argue and kind of see what works and what doesn't. But the efficiency increase for, if the hearing is set for 10 o'clock and we had a video conference this morning with the court at 10 o'clock, and, sure enough, at 10 o'clock, everyone's logged on. You're not waiting around for an hour while you wait for your case to be called. So that increase in time is much more efficient, and that's going to ultimately benefit the client when they're not paying for your wait time or your commuting time, parking. So there's a number of benefits to the client for sure. And then, as the lawyer, you think, okay, well, maybe that's not as good for me. But what that lets you do is, if you think about the flip side of that coin, and I know a lot of lawyers are going to be upset that they're not, spending time waiting for hearings, but the positive side is that you're able to service more clients or get to other issues and ultimately expand your practice. So it's definitely a good thing as we see it. And I know not every lawyer would see it the same way.
Well, but I think this is going to change litigation forever, right? I don't expect to ever go to a status conference in real life if I can help it.
Yeah, I think that we're going to see a very marked shift for status conferences and other kind of short check-in type things, scheduling conferences. I think that those things are definitely going to shift to Zoom going forward. I do think that there will probably be a return, particularly, maybe among certain judges who would prefer to have parties come in. There's always, of course, a benefit of being face-to-face with, your adverse party. But I do think that this is going to be a very key shift in the litigation.
And have you seen a change in kind of the adoption of technology by the courts? It seemed like before COVID, courts had been reluctant to adopt a lot of these technologies that we've been using at the firm for quite some time. Has the court system in Louisiana kind of jumped ahead to the 21st century? Absolutely.
Yeah, this has been a definite jump. Obviously, the range of law firms is quite varied before COVID, and so I guess I'll come back to law firms, but we've definitely seen an increase in courts that are adopting things like Zoom technology. That's something that we never really saw, for instance, in civil district court before COVID. We did see the 24th had taken the lead to set up court online, and so the 24th, had kind of led the way there to be prepared for something like this. But we're definitely seeing courts, just kind of out of necessity, having to adopt technology to service the needs during this time.
And how have my client meetings have changed a lot. I'm having a client meeting today at 1:30, and we're doing it by video conference because the client doesn't want to have that human interaction. They're worried about COVID. And so do you think that we're going to start turning phone calls into video calls, and will this cut down on attorney travel time and things of that nature?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's going to cut down a lot, particularly on initial meetings. I think that, unless maybe it's more necessary that a client come into the office to meet in person, I think that we're going to see a very key shift to doing more digital meetings, more things by Zoom or whatever technology your firm is going to adapt. But I think also you're going to see a lot more of e-signatures, and you're seeing firms adapt that because they don't want to, send off engagement letters or have clients send them back. So
Right.
these are things, a lot of these things we've been doing since we.
Right. When's the last time we had a
Yeah.
physical engagement letter at this firm? It's been years. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, we e-sign everything here, and I think that's the way of the future because, it's just easier. It's cheaper. There's an email record of the whole thing. You can't lose the document. Well, you could, but you shouldn't lose the document, right?
Sure. And I'll say this too, this kind of goes back to benefiting the client. A lot of times it's going to be more advantageous for the client to not have to come into our offices,
right?
To not meet with us in person. That's going to be something that lets them stay in their office. If we need to meet for an hour, we can do it by Zoom, and then they can get back to their business without having to come downtown, park, and come meet with us. As efficient as we can be in person, if that saves them that time, that's time that they can devote to their business and keep driving, that profit and revenue for their business instead of, time where they're taking time out of their day to schedule and come in to see us. So that's definitely something that will be good for the clients also long term.
So this seems like a win-win for everybody. The lawyers have more time, the clients pay for less time, the courts have less in-person work to do so they can focus on the things that they need to do. You see any downside to all this technology?
I really see it as a net positive. There surely are a couple downsides, when you're just talking about that kind of interaction where you're digital, maybe you've never actually met, you're never going to be able to replace that. But I think that this is a net positive. And I'll tell you a story of, there are two clients in particular I handled issues for during COVID, emergency issues that were fully handled from, that time period of March when we shut down, and into April and May. And so we had done everything by Zoom. We had done everything by, email and digital letters and emails. And so I never even met the clients until last week when I finally met each of them in person. And so, it was just a definite moment of someone coming to us in crisis. We fully handled everything, entirely digitally, never met the client. And it was great to finally meet them, but it kind of did highlight that, law firms, if you're able to adapt to the technologies and really incorporate them well, you don't need to, it's okay to embrace technology. You don't need to, resort to physical interactions and, figure out what's better for your client how you can better service them.
For sure. And that's something we've been doing here for a while. Obviously we lean strongly on technology at this law firm. We joke about how we're the law firm of the future, but it's also true. We really believe strongly in the use of technology to save client money and to make sure we have time to do the things that we want to do with our families, work out 3 times a day like you, Mike, and have a good life. Well, guys, I think that's all the time we have this week for the Wednesday web chat. On behalf of Mike Finkelstein and myself, I want to thank you for joining us on this litigation web chat. Check out SNW.LAW. There's a lot of great resources there. Next week, we'll probably have a little bit of a PPP update from Keith Naccari as the PPP claims are now finally starting to be paid back. People are getting their money forgiven, and that's great. There's a lot going on in the business climate. We expect a lot more to happen with COVID. Everybody, please be safe. Wash your hands. We'll see you next week.